Get up, or do I have to drag you up and remind you who really runs this place? The final threat echoed across the darkened parking lot, where a lone Pearl struggled to push herself off the cold asphalt, blood dripping, hands shaking from exhaustion. Her bullies laughed, yanking at her jacket, lost in their arrogance, completely unaware of the growing roar approaching like thunder on wheels. In an instant, their confidence shattered as massive, tattooed figures emerged, ready to deliver a lesson in true power. What secret alliance brought these infamous angels from hell to defend someone no one else dared to protect? Keep watching. Justice is about to strike in a way you'll never see coming, and the ending will leave you breathless. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below.
The final bell at Oak Creek High didn't sound like freedom. It snapped through the air like a prison alarm. Sharp, electric, merciless. For Mara Lane, that ring didn't announce the beginning of an execution. She sat rigid in the back row of history while the rest of the class surged for the door. 20 kids spilling out in bright colors, expensive denim, and loud, careless laughter. Their voices bounced off the walls like nothing in the world could touch them. Lake house parties, new cars, promises wrapped in money. Amara stayed invisible on purpose. Head down, shoulders tight. She shoved a heavy textbook into a backpack that had been fraying for 2 years, like even the fabric was tired of holding her life together. Amara was 16, but her eyes carried the drained, faraway look of someone who'd been surviving for decades. A faded gray, oversized t-shirt, thrift store jeans. In Oak Creek, where the lawns were clipped to perfection and the bank accounts were treated like birthright, poverty wasn't just unfortunate, it was a sin. And being poor and black in a school that was 90% white and wealthy didn't just make her an outcast, it made her prey. She waited until the room emptied, until the echoes faded, then stood up with the quiet precision of someone trying not to be noticed. Her plan was simple. Slip out the side exit near the library, catch the public bus, and vanish into the safety of her small, empty apartment before anyone remembered she existed. She almost reached the door when her pocket vibrated. One buzz, short, sharp, violent. Her lungs stopped working for a second. Her fingers shook as she pulled out an old smartphone. The screen cracked in a spiderweb that looked like damage trying to crawl off the glass. A new message glowed. Sender blocked, but she didn't need a name. Parking lot C. You know the rules. Don't make me come find you. The blood drained from her face so fast she felt cold. Her stomach twisted into a hard knot of dread. Parking lot C was the farthest lot behind the football stadium equipment shed, out of sight, out of mind, and most importantly, out of the security cameras. Everyone knew it. Students knew it. Teachers knew it. And predators knew it best of all. Amara turned without thinking and ducked into the nearest girls' restroom, moving like someone escaping a fire. She locked herself inside the handicap stall and pressed her back to the metal door. She needed 1 minute, just one. 1 minute to stop her hands from shaking, 1 minute to convince her body she was still in control. The restroom reeked of harsh bleach and fake lavender, sweet poison, the kind that tried to mask the truth and made her nauseous anyway. She leaned her forehead against the cold metal and squeezed her eyes shut. Fear wasn't a feeling now, it was a throat clench, a pulse rattle, a silent scream under skin. She unlocked the phone again and hit the only contact that mattered, Dad. Ring, ring, ring. Each one felt like a desperate plea thrown into the dark. Pick up, please, pick up. Then his voicemail, steady, distant, ordinary, like the world hadn't cracked open around her. Hi, you've reached Darius. I'm hauling a load right now and can't get to the phone. Leave a message and I'll call you back when I hit a rest stop. Beep. Amara bit her lip so hard she tasted iron. Darius Lane was a good man, a long-haul trucker who drove 18-hour days just to keep a roof over their heads. Right now, he was somewhere far away on the highway, while his daughter lived in a town that smiled in daylight and hunted in the shadows. He didn't know about the bullying. He didn't know about the threats. She made sure he didn't. 2 years ago, her mother had died of cancer, and the grief had already carved a hollow space in her father that never really healed. If he knew what was happening, he'd drop everything to come running, lose his job, lose their only lifeline, and then the monsters would win twice. "I love you, Dad," she whispered into the phone, forcing her voice to stay steady, even as her heart pounded like it was trying to break free. "Just wanted to hear your voice. Be safe." She hung up, and the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was a closed door, a sealed room, a reminder. No mother to hold her, no father close enough to protect her, no teacher who cared enough to look past grades and see the bruises on her spirit. Amara was a ghost haunting the halls of the privileged, but even ghosts can't hide forever. If she didn't go to parking lot C today, they'd find her tomorrow, and the punishment for disobedience was always worse than the punishment for submission. That was the twisted law of Oak Creek's food chain. Obedience bought you smaller pain. Resistance bought you ruin. Amara inhaled slowly, wiped her face with a rough paper towel until the tears were gone, until the evidence of fear was erased. Not because she wasn't scared, but because she refused to feed them. She slung her backpack over one shoulder and pushed the stall door open. The hallway outside was deserted. Lockers lined the walls like silent metal soldiers, straight-backed, unfeeling, trained to witness without intervening. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows and threw long, distorted shadows across the floor, stretching everything into something darker than it should have been. Amara walked toward the exit doors at the end of the hall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She pushed the heavy double doors open and stepped into the cool autumn air. And she didn't know it yet, but every step she took toward parking lot C was a step deeper into a trap that was already waiting for her, quiet, patient, and cruel. And the reason for that meeting, it all began with a single accident months ago. The kind that seems small in the moment until it becomes the spark that burns your whole world down.
3 months earlier, Oak Creek High's cafeteria was a wall of noise. Teenagers shouting, trays slapping tables, grease and stale pizza hanging in the air. For most students, lunch was a social ritual, a kingdom where popularity ruled. For Amara Lane, it was a mission. Get food, reach her corner, eat fast, disappear. That Tuesday, the room was packed beyond reason, bodies pressed together with the confidence of people who'd never been told no. Amara hugged her tray like armor and slipped through the crowd with her eyes on the floor. Designer shoes flashed past her scuffed canvas sneakers. Her safe table waited in the far back corner, seconds away, when a football player, laughing, stepped backward without looking. His shoulder hit her. Her balance snapped. Her fingers failed. The plate lifted. For one cruel heartbeat, it seemed to hover. Then spaghetti and marinara flew in a red arc and landed on a pair of pristine white Air Jordans. The cafeteria didn't fade into quiet. It flatlined. A silence so sudden she could hear the vending machines humming. Amara looked up, and the air in her lungs turned to lead. Carter Langston owned the shoes, Oak Creek's golden boy. His father sat on the school board and owned half the county in real estate, the kind of man whose name opened doors before he knocked. Now he stared at the stain with clinical disgust. "I'm so sorry," Amara said, voice shaking. Instinct dropped her to her knees. She grabbed a napkin, trying to wipe the damage away before it became a sentence. "It was an accident. Someone bumped me. I didn't—" "Don't touch me." His tone was quiet, but it cut like wire. Amara froze, her hand hovering. Carter kicked the napkin away as if he carried disease. He looked at the shoe, then at her,
like comparing trash to trash. "Look at what you did," he said, pointing. "You ruined them, but I shouldn't be surprised. People like you ruin everything you touch." The words weren't just an insult, they were permission. Two boys slid in beside him, Mason Rourke and Cole Vance, not friends, enforcers. They folded their arms and blocked the nearest exit, smiling like hyenas waiting for the lion to start eating. "I can pay for cleaning," Amara whispered, even though she knew she had less than $10. "Please." Carter let out a dry laugh. "Pay? You can't even afford your own lunch. My dad pays more in taxes in a week than your father makes in a year." He stepped closer, towering over her. And the cafeteria watched. Students, teachers, phones lifted to record. No one intervened. At Oak Creek, money was protection, and poverty was a target. "Stand up," Carter ordered. Amara stood. Her legs felt wrong, like they belonged to someone else. Every instinct screamed to run, but fear pinned her in place. "You don't get to say sorry and walk away," Carter hissed, leaning close so only she could hear. "That stain isn't coming out, and neither are you. You owe me now. You belong to me until I decide the debt is paid." "It was an accident," she tried, a final scrap of dignity fighting for air. Carter's smile vanished. "Accidents have consequences. When you break something valuable, you pay. Since you have no money, you'll pay with your time. From this second forward, you do what I say when I say it, or your trucker daddy loses his commercial license. My father knows people at the Transport Authority. One call, and he's unemployed." The threat hit harder than a punch. Darius Lane was her anchor. His license was their lifeline. Rent, food, survival, especially after cancer took her mother. Carter didn't threaten her body first. He threatened the man who kept her alive. "Do we have a deal?" he asked, sliding his iPhone out like a weapon. "Or do I make the call?" Amara scanned the room for a spark of humanity. A teacher turned away. Students stared at the floor. Mason and Cole looked bored. No one was coming. The silence felt like a contract signed by everyone in that room, a promise that her pain would never be worth their risk, ever. "We have a deal," Amara whispered. Carter smiled, satisfied. "Good. Now get out of my face." Amara backed away, left her lunch on the floor, and ran. Out the doors, down the hallway, lungs burning, trying to outrun the laughter that finally erupted behind her. The marinara could be cleaned off white leather. The cruelty that stained Carter Langston was permanent. He didn't just get a dirty shoe that day, he got a victim, and the nightmare began.
Amara Lane woke the next morning praying the cafeteria nightmare had been nothing more than stress playing tricks on an empty stomach. But the second she stepped through Oak Creek R's double doors, the building answered her prayer with a laugh. The air felt thick, charged, buzzing, like the halls were wired to punish her. Whispers trailed behind her footsteps, heads turned, eyes sharpened. She hugged her books to her chest like paper armor and moved fast, aiming for first-period biology before anyone could remember she existed. She kept her gaze pinned to the linoleum, counting tiles the way people count breaths in a panic attack. 1, 2, 3, anything to keep her throat from closing. She didn't make it. Near the science wing lockers, a wall stepped into her path. Mason Rourke, legs planted wide, arms folded. He occupied the center of the corridor like a bouncer guarding a door she was never allowed to enter. Amara tried to slide right. Mason mirrored her. Left, he mirrored again, smiling like he'd practiced this in front of a mirror. "Going somewhere, trash?" Mason's voice rang loud enough to stop the hallway's current. A few students slowed. A few phones tilted upward, hungry. "Let me pass," Amara said.
keeping her voice low, refusing to give him the satisfaction of eye contact.
"You pass when we say you pass," Mason sneered, and he leaned forward and made a wet, guttural sound in the back of his throat, an ugly ritual performed for an audience. Amara flinched anyway. She couldn't stop her body from reacting. Before she could turn her face away, he spit. It hit her cheek, warm, sticky, filthy, and for a second her brain refused to process what her skin already understood. Humiliation turned physical, like a burn that spread under the surface. The Carter blurred at the edges. She lifted her eyes. Carter Langston stood behind Mason, leaning casually against a locker, like a king watching an execution proceed exactly on schedule. His face was calm, too calm. His eyes were dead, cold, and perfectly awake. He didn't have to say a word. He raised an eyebrow and tapped his wrist, a silent reminder of the debt he'd invented and the rules he expected her to live under. Interest, his expression said. Payment due. Amar wiped her cheek with her sleeve, swallowing the scream that tried to climb out of her chest. Mason laughed. Someone else laughed too, thin and nervous, like they were afraid not to. Amara shoved past him and ran, because there was only one place in the building that was legally required to be safe. She burst into the guidance counselor's office, chest heaving, tears finally spilling over the dam she'd been holding with clenched teeth. Mr. Garrett Hale sat behind a wide mahogany desk that looked expensive enough to buy silence. Framed certificates lined the wall. Photos of smiling, diverse students beamed like propaganda, proof of a school that did not exist. Hale looked up slowly and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, as if her panic was an interruption, not an emergency. "You're supposed to be in biology," he said. "Do you have a pass?" "They spit on me," Amara choked out, pointing to her cheek, still damp with residue. "Mason spit on my face in the hallway. Everyone saw it. Carter was there. They won't stop. You have to help me." Hale exhaled, long, tired, irritated, the sigh of a man who filed human suffering under inconvenience. He gestured to the chair like he was doing her a favor. "Sit, take a breath." He slid a tissue box across the desk. Then he tilted his head, voice flattening into professional doubt. "Spit is a strong accusation. Are you sure it wasn't an accident? Hallways are crowded. People sneeze. People cough." "He looked at me and did it," Amara insisted, her voice rising despite her effort to keep it controlled. "Carter told him to. They're targeting me because of what happened yesterday. You have to call their parents. Suspend them. The handbook says 0 tolerance for assault." Hale leaned back and tented his fingers, shifting from mild concern to polished condescension. "Amara, let's be realistic. Carter Langston is an honor student. His family has contributed significantly to this school." He paused on purpose, letting money fill the room like a gas. "The new library wing? The Langston family." The word realistic landed like a slap. It didn't mean truth. It meant hierarchy. Accusing someone like Carter of orchestrated harassment is serious. It could damage his future. "What about my future?" Amara shot back, disbelief cracking through her fear. "What about my safety?" "Your safety is important," Hale said smoothly, the way people say thoughts and prayers. "But we also need to examine your role in this. I heard about the cafeteria incident. You damaged expensive property. Perhaps the boys are just blowing off steam. They're teenagers." He softened his tone like he was offering wisdom. "Boys will be boys." The phrase was a coffin lid. It sealed her inside the problem and locked the boys outside accountability. "Sometimes," Hale added, leaning forward, lowering his voice as if gifting her a secret, "when we react dramatically, we invite more negative attention. My advice, don't make waves. Don't be the girl who cries wolf. Learn to fit in. Apologize again if you have to. Show them you can take a joke. If you start filing reports and demanding suspensions, you'll isolate yourself further. The world is tough, Amara. Toughen up.
don't play the victim." Amara stared at him, and the room tilted, not from dizziness, but clarity. She saw it with brutal simplicity. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was an office built to translate violence into paperwork and then lose the paperwork on purpose. This man wasn't confused. He was choosing a side. "So you aren't going to do anything," Amara said, voice quiet now, almost empty. "I am documenting our conversation," Hale replied, tapping his pen against a notepad that remained perfectly blank. Then he smiled without warmth. "Wash your face and get back to class before you're marked absent. We don't want your grades slipping, do we?" His eyes flicked up, sharp as a needle. "Your father has enough to worry about." The mention of Darius Lane was the final twist of the knife. It wasn't concern. It was leverage. "Keep quiet, or we pull your struggling father into this and call it your fault." Amara stood. The heat of her tears drained away, and something colder settled into her chest, something clean and dangerous. The illusion of adult protection shattered completely, and in the shards she saw the truth. The administration wasn't a shield. It was a weapon Carter could lift with one finger. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Hale," she said, voice hollow. She turned and walked out. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, and the sound echoed down the quiet reception area like a cell door locking. For a moment she stood alone, breathing in that emptiness, letting it teach her what the school would never admit. The system had failed her. The adults had failed her. Amara wiped her face one last time. The shame was gone. In its place lived a pharaoh instinct, raw, focused, awake. If they wanted war, she could not win it by begging for fairness inside a rigged courtroom. She would have to survive in the trenches. And survival, she understood now, wasn't always pretty. Some choices keep you alive. Some choices haunt you. And Oak Creek had just forced her to start choosing.
The following weeks turned Amara Lane's life into a grotesque reenactment of a history her ancestors had bled to escape. Oak Creek High became a plantation in everything but name, and Carter Langston wore the role of overseer like it had been tailored for him. The unspoken contract he forced on her in the cafeteria wasn't a prank, it was law. It erased her name and replaced it with a function. She wasn't a student anymore, she was property, and the cruelty was always staged for an audience, because humiliation is louder when it has witnesses. It started on a rainy Thursday near the senior lockers during the class change stampede. Carter stopped in the middle of the corridor like he owned the flow of oxygen. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He snapped his fingers. The sound cracked through the chatter like a whip. Then he glanced down at his left sneaker and back up at her. The laces were untied. "Fix it," he said, casual, bored, as if ordering an extra napkin. Amara went rigid while heads turned and the hallway's momentum stalled to watch the show. She gripped her binder until her knuckles blanched. "I said fix it," Carter repeated, his tone dropping into something darker, heavier. "Unless you want me to make that phone call to the transport authority right now." The mention of her father was the trigger he loved most, clean, precise, lethal. Amara's body obeyed before her mind could argue. She lowered to her knees. Linoleum met her skin like cold judgment. Her hands shook as she tied the laces of the boy who tormented her, and she could feel the heat of eyes pressing into her back like brands. Mason Rourke and Cole Vance hovered nearby, their laughter muffled and satisfied, as if they were watching a pet trick they'd trained. Amara kept her gaze on the floor, swallowing the nausea, willing herself not to flinch. "Good girl," Carter said when she finished. Then he patted her head, slow, deliberate, as if she were a stray he'd decided to keep. "Now carry my gym bag to the field. It's heavy." The words landed soft. The meaning didn't. It was domination dressed up as routine. The bell didn't end it.
The bell never ended anything. The servitude followed her into the shadowed corners of the library, into the edges of the parking lot, into every quiet place where adults stopped looking and cruelty could breathe. Carter made her write his AP history essays. He had her rewrite his English papers until they were flawless. They enacted as if excellence had always belonged to him. He sat on the hood of his Jeep Wrangler eating a burger while he ordered her to scrub dried mud off his tires with a rag and a bucket of freezing water, like she was responsible for cleaning the dirt he drove through on purpose. Her hands went numb, her fingers cracked, the cold carved pain into her joints. Carter watched with a satisfied smirk, tossing his trash onto the asphalt for her to pick up like she was a human trash can with a heartbeat. "You missed a spot," he'd say, pointing at a speck of dirt. "Do it again." And Amara did it again. She scrubbed until her skin felt raw, until the surface of her life looked clean, while the inside of her shook apart. But beneath the mask of obedience, something else began to ignite, quiet, stubborn, intelligent. Amara understood early that she couldn't fight them with her fists. They were stronger, richer, protected by administrators like Mr. Garrett Hale, who turned violence into paperwork and then burned the paperwork on purpose. If she swung back, she'd be the one in handcuffs. So she hunted for a different weapon. She needed insurance. She needed proof that couldn't be laughed off, edited away, or buried under donations. She became the perfect performance of a broken victim. Head down. Yes. No. I'm sorry. She gave them the picture they wanted, because a predator relaxes when it believes the prey has stopped thinking. But every time Carter cornered her, every time Mason threatened her, her hand slipped into the front pocket of her oversized hoodie. Her thumb found the record button on her cracked phone like a prayer bead. She captured Carter's voice using slurs while she did his homework, audio that hissed with entitlement and hate. In the library, she propped the phone against her water bottle, angling it just enough to catch Cole knocking her books from her hands and kicking at her shins, laughing like cruelty was a sport. She documented dates, times, locations, names of the bystanders who stared straight ahead, pretending neutrality was innocence. The phone was old, the battery died fast, but the memory card filled with digital venom, evidence so heavy it felt like the only weight that belonged to her. At night, she repeated the same sentence to keep herself from breaking. She was not a slave. She was a spy behind enemy lines. Every yes was camouflage. Every lowered gaze was strategy. Every recording was a matchbook. One day, she promised herself, she would burn their kingdom down with the truth. And that promise dragged us back to today, the text message that sent her hiding in the bathroom at the start of this story. Lot C. The words hit her like winter in the lungs. Usually, Carter delivered his orders in person, enjoying the theater of control. A text meant urgency. It meant anger. It meant something had shifted. A thought seized her by the throat. Did they know? Had Mason glimpsed her screen glowing yesterday? Had Carter noticed the way she positioned her phone during the essay session? If they knew about the recordings, this wasn't another humiliation. This was an interrogation. Amara walked toward the exit doors with legs that felt like packed in concrete. The late afternoon sun sunk toward the horizon, stretching long skeletal shadows across the campus. The halls were empty now, and the silence magnified her heartbeat until it sounded like boots on a march. She pushed through the doors. Wind bit her face. She pulled her thin thrift store cardigan tighter, though it couldn't block the cold or the dread that lived deeper than skin. She passed the football field. She passed the main student lot where expensive convertibles usually gleamed like trophies. Then she veered toward Lot C, the neglected strip of asphalt behind the equipment sheds, out of sight, out of camera range, hidden from the main road like a secret everyone agreed not to name. She rounded the shed, and her breath hitched so hard it hurt. Carter was there, leaning against the grill of a black Jeep like the scene had been staged for him alone. Mason and Cole flanked him, statues of malice, faces blank with anticipation. And resting on Carter's shoulder, catching the last dull light, was a silver metal baseball bat. No smile, no playful mask,
just a calm that felt clinical. Amara froze. The instinct to run screamed through her skull, but her legs refused to obey. Carter pushed off the car and took a slow step toward her. He dragged the tip of the bat across the asphalt. The metallic scrape shrieked into the evening air, high, sharp, merciless. Carter's voice stayed low, almost gentle, which made it worse. "You've been a bad girl, Amara," he said, calm as a judge reading a sentence, "and bad girls need to be punished."
The firmament over Lot C contorted into a morbid palette, raw violet hemorrhaging into leaden gray. Clouds rotated like a pressurized seal, strangling the final anemic thread of daylight. An icy mist descended, lubricating the pavement and masking the saltwater etching tracks down Amar Lane's cheeks. She retreated until the rusted steel bit into her vertebrae with a resonant metallic thud. The shed provided no sanctuary. It was a barricade. The trap was sealed. Carter Langston didn't bellow. He didn't posture. He didn't emulate the caricatures of cinematic antagonists. He merely offered a solitary hand, upward, a monarch demanding a tithe. "The nylon bag," he commanded, his frequency horizontal, devoid of heat, paralyzing in its stillness. Amara anchored her white-knuckled fingers to the disintegrating straps as if they were oxygen. Within that fabric lived her final deterrent, her fractured device, her archives, her thin shield against a zip code's vanity. "Never," she exhaled, the sound nearly erased by the gale. Carter didn't debate. He signaled, a microscopic inclination of his jaw. Cole Vance ignited, a physical manifestation of a lethal command. The pack was violently extricated from Amara's grasp, the momentum wrenching her torso. She scrambled toward it by reflex, but Mason Rourke slammed her against the corrugated wall, collapsing her diaphragm. Cole purged the contents with the indifference of a garbage collector. Texts, folders, and plastic pens hemorrhaging onto the saturated asphalt. Then it emerged, luminescent, incriminating. The crimson indicator pulsed. Archive active. For a microsecond, the atmosphere stilled. Carter descended, retrieved the device, and scrutinized the interface as if observing a biological contaminant. He shifted his gaze to Amara. A grin materialized, surgical and calibrated, but it bypassed his vision entirely. His eyes remained arctic, vigilant, apex. "Digital surveillance?" he murmured, projecting the disappointment of a trainer bitten by a stray. "You imagined this circuit board was a savior? You intended to snare me?" His laughter was caustic, bifurcating the mist. "I possess this institution, vermin. My bloodline dictates the administration. And you?" He allowed the vacuum to expand. "You possess zero." He elevated the device skyward before executing it against the ground. The impact was muted, a clinical fracture, but to Amara it echoed like the slamming of a tomb. Her leverage, her policy, her legal redemption pulverized into silicon dust. Carter bypassed the debris as if it were atmospheric noise. "Initiate," he stated, his vocal cords untroubled. "The curriculum on confidentiality." Mason lunged. He seized the color of Mara's denim, faded, voluminous, ancestral. It was a maternal heirloom. It retained the molecular ghost of lavender soap, a phantom embrace woven into the seams. It was the singular sanctuary remaining in her world. "Release me!" Amara shrieked, lacerating his wrists with her nails. Mason's lips curled. "Observe this refuse," he mocked. "It reeks of indigence." He jerked the fabric. The denim surrendered with a visceral tear, amplified by the vacant lot. The appendage separated. Amara's vocalization wasn't mere agony. It was bereavement, unrefined and catastrophic. Precipitation collided with her flesh, yet the desecration burned with a thermal intensity beyond the climate. They weren't merely seeking injury. They were attempting her total erasure. Cole intervened, sweeping her foundation away. Amara collided with the earth, air evacuating her respiratory system. Grime abraded her palms. Before she could regroup, the perimeter constricted. Thrusts, impacts, souls, a rhythmic cadence of violence, a pack synchronizing their cruelty, chuckling as if this were subsidized entertainment. Amara fetalized, shielding her skull, attempting to occupy a space smaller than their malice. "Stop," she wheezed, the tang of iron flooding her mouth. "Enough." Carter's voice hovered over the assault, serene as a death warrant. "This is merely the introduction." Then the motion ceased. Amara remained on the saturated stone, convulsing, the storm draining across her visage like celestial exhaustion. She pried one inflamed eyelid open. Carter loomed once more, now wielding the silver alloy bat. He bypassed her features entirely. He was focusing lower, calibrating, surveying. His countenance wasn't fury, it was engineering. The clarity that confirms this isn't harassment, it is termination. "Rodents don't enjoy flight," he murmured with a terrifying intimacy. "This settles the footwear. This settles the archive. This settles your pulse." He anchored his stance, retracted the weapon. The aluminum captured the dim radiance, a grotesque pendulum of retribution, prepared for the arc. Amara fused her eyelids shut, braced for impact, attempted to vanish within her own marrow. Suddenly, the substratum began to oscillate. Initially, it was a sub-bass frequency, profound and remote, like tectonic plates shifting beneath the concrete. Then it magnified, mechanical, percussive, inexorable. A roar ascended, obliterating the gale and the storm, transforming Lot C into an arena for an entity superior to Carter's petty fiefdom. Carter paralyzed. The alloy bat stalled at the apex. He pivoted toward the entry. The vibration wasn't merely volume. It was a reckoning, approaching rapidly.
Day arrived on two wheels, and Carter Langston's eyes went wide with a kind of fear his money had never taught him to name. The iron serpents rolled in like a column of modern cavalry. Headlights slicing the rain-dark gloom, engines thundering across Lot C until the air tasted like fuel and judgment. Bikes fanned out fast, surgical, sealing the space in steel and leather. One moment it was three boys and a broken girl on wet asphalt. The next, it was a ring, tight, impenetrable, a boundary line the bullies didn't get to cross. Then, at a silent cue from the leader, every engine died at the exact same second. The roar didn't fade. It stopped, clean, abrupt, terrifying. The silence that replaced it felt heavier than noise, like a predator deciding whether to growl or strike. Kickstands dropped, leather creaked, boots hit pavement in unison. Rafe Wolfstone Calder led the pack. He moved with the slow certainty of a storm front, a tall, broad wall of a man, shoulders cutting the gray sky into smaller pieces, ink and old scars mapping a life boys like Carter only pretended to understand. He walked straight through the corridor of bikes and stopped a few feet from Carter, close enough to make breathing feel like permission. Wolfstone slid off his sunglasses. His eyes were cold, hard, and unblinking, steel blue without mercy. "You dropped something, son," he said, voice rough as gravel. Carter opened his mouth, but the words failed him. The arrogance that usually lived behind his father's last name evaporated on contact. Suddenly, he wasn't an owner. He was a kid caught trespassing in the wrong kind of territory. Behind Carter, Mason Rourke's tough guy posture cracked first. Cole Vance, built like a linebacker, loud 5 minutes ago, went visibly unsteady. His gaze darted around the circle, men and women with crossed arms, weathered faces, and absolutely zero interest in excuses. Cole's breathing turned ragged. Then his confidence collapsed in the most humiliating way possible, his expensive pants darkening as panic took over. A biker woman with a bandana and a flint-hard stare made a sound of disgust that didn't even bother to become a sentence.
Wolfstone didn't look at Cole again. His attention stayed locked on Carter like a spotlight. He took one step forward. Carter stumbled back, 2 frantic steps, tangled feet, almost falling. I didn't, Carter stammered, voice cracking. We were just playing. Wolfstone tasted the word with a pause. Then he looked down. Amara Lane was still curled on the wet ground, clutching torn fabric to herself like it could hold her together. Rain threaded through her hair. She lifted her eyes, confused and terrified, trying to understand what kind of nightmare this had become. For a fraction of a second, something gentler flickered across Wolfstone's face. Then it hardened again, granite returning to granite as he turned back to the boys. "That doesn't look like a game," he said evenly. "That looks like 3 cowards attacking a child." His gloved finger pointed to the ruined denim jacket lying in a shallow puddle, the one they'd ripped away, the one that didn't belong to this parking lot, this cruelty, this town. "Pick it up," Wolfstone ordered. Carter hesitated. He glanced toward Mason and Cole, but they were frozen, one shaking, one staring at the ground like it might open and swallow him. Wolfstone stepped closer until his shadow covered his shoes. "Pick up the lady's jacket," he repeated, quieter this time. "Now." The boy who had forced Amara to kneel in a cafeteria bent his knees like gravity had finally remembered him. His hand went down into the dirty water. He lifted the jacket with a trembling grip and held it out like an offering to a god he didn't believe in until this moment. "Not to me," Wolfstone growled. "To her." Carter turned. He had you bend again. The reversal was absolute. The self-appointed king lowered himself in the mud of his own consequences. "Give it to her," Wolfstone said, and Carter placed the jacket beside Amara with shaking hands, looking like he might be sick from fear alone. Wolfstone stepped past him and knelt next to Amara. The iron serpents tightened the ring and turned outward, bodies becoming a living wall between her and the world. Wolfstone shrugged off his own leather vest, heavy, warm, smelling like road and smoke and freedom, and draped it over Amara's shoulders with deliberate care. "You okay, Tint?" he asked, voice lowered, not soft but controlled, like he was holding back something much worse. Amara nodded, still stunned. She pulled the leather tighter around her. It didn't feel like clothing. It felt like armor. "Why? Why are you here?" Wolfstone stood, rising into the space like a verdict. He looked back at her with a grim, almost weary hint of a smile, like the answer had roots deeper than this parking lot. Around them, Carter Langston and his boys huddled in a stinking cluster of fear, finally understanding the simplest truth in the universe. They hadn't just hurt a poor girl. They had declared war on the iron serpents.
"You asked why we're here," Rafe Wolfstone said, dropping his voice until it belonged only to Amara, not the trembling boys, not the rain, not the stunned silence of Lot C. "Your father is a man of honor. Last winter, on an ice-slick stretch of highway near the state line, Wolfstone's bike fishtailed and threw him hard. He went under the guardrail, metal bit into his leg, fuel hissed from a torn line. Cars passed, headlights swept over him like indifferent searchlights, and kept going. They didn't see a human being in trouble. They saw a biker. They saw a problem. They saw something safer to ignore. Then Darius Lane stopped," Wolfstone continued, and for a moment the steel in his eyes softened into something older, respect. He pulled his rig onto the shoulder in a blizzard. He grabbed a crowbar, pried that rail like it was paper, and dragged me out just seconds before the bike lit up. Wolfstone exhaled once, controlled. "I tried to pay him. He refused. He said he had a daughter at home waiting for him, and that was payment enough." Amara felt her throat tighten, but the tears that stung her eyes weren't the same ones the bullies had forced out of her. She pictured her father exactly as he was, worn, quiet, stubborn in that working man way, doing the right thing without needing applause for it.
a hero in a storm who never once called himself one. "He called me today," Wolfstone said, the warmth vanishing as his voice re-hardened into granite. "You sounded scared on his voicemail. He couldn't get back in time. He asked me to check on you." Wolfstone's jaw flexed. "I promised him I'd do more than check. I promised I'd balance the scales." Gratitude hit Amara so fast it almost made her dizzy, but Wolfstone didn't let the moment become a lullaby. His gaze dropped to the shattered pieces of her phone, glittering on the wet asphalt. He nudged a shard of glass with his boot, slow and deliberate, like he was reading the crime scene with his body. "There's one thing I don't understand," he said. He lifted his head and his focus sharpened into something predatory, a tension with teeth. "We got here fast, but those boys were already waiting, and they knew exactly what was in your bag." Wolfstone turned to Carter Langston, still kneeling in the mess of his own fear, shoulders collapsed, arrogance gone like it had never existed. "How'd you know?" Wolfstone demanded. "How'd you know she was recording you?" Carter's jaw trembled. He tried to hide behind silence. "Answer me!" Wolfstone roared. The sound hit the metal sheds and bounced back like a gunshot. Carter flinched and scrambled for the first lie that might keep him breathing. "I got a text," he stammered. "Someone told me. They said she was recording us. They said I had to stop her before she uploaded it." Amara froze. Who knew? She had been careful. She hadn't even told her father. Wolfstone's eyes narrowed, scanning the perimeter like a hunter reading tall grass. Lot C was mostly empty, athletic fields on one side, brick and windows on the other, dumpsters crouched near the administration wing like metal animals. Then Wolfstone saw it, movement where movement shouldn't be. A figure lingered near the corner of the administration wing, half hidden behind a pillar, a phone pressed to his ear, watching, listening, calculating. "There," Wolfstone murmured, pointing a gloved finger like a verdict. "We have an audience." Amara squinted through the drizzle. The figure stepped back, trying to melt away. Too late. A motion sensor light flickered on and flooded the corner in harsh yellow. A man in a beige suit, a briefcase, a posture that screamed panic, not of the bikers, not of the bullies, but of being seen. Amara's breath caught. The realization hit harder than any shove. Mr. Garrett Hale! The realization hit harder than any shove. She had sat in his office. She had cried in his chair. She had begged for help, like help was a real thing adults still offered. And while she spoke, he hadn't been hearing a child in danger. He had been hearing a threat to the school's image. "He told you!" Amara whispered, horror turning into a cold, clean rage. "My counselor, the man who's supposed to protect students, he told you to do this?" Carter nodded weakly, desperate now, eager to trade someone else's neck for his own. "I said you were a liability," he muttered. "He said if the videos got out, it would hurt funding. He told me to handle it." Wolfstone stared at Hale in the distance, eyes unreadable. Hale realized he'd been spotted. He turned and hurried for the building, disappearing through the doors like a roach racing from light. "He can run, but he can't hide," Wolfstone said, voice dropping into something low and dangerous. Then Wolfstone placed a steady hand on Amara's shoulder, not gentle, but anchoring, like he was giving her back gravity. "Get on the bike, kid. We're done talking." "Where are we going?" Amara asked, wiping at the blood on her lip with a shaking thumb. "To a safe house," Wolfstone replied. "Your father's meeting us there." Then he looked back toward the school, toward the windows, the doors, the whole polished lie. "And then we burn their little kingdom down, not with fire, with the truth." Amara climbed onto the back of the massive black Harley, fingers gripping leather like it was the first solid thing she'd touched in weeks. The engine roared alive beneath her, a living animal waking up. She looked back one last time at Oak Creek High School. Carter and his boys huddled small on wet pavement, reduced to what they'd always been under the costume, cowards. The administration wing looming quiet and clean, the dark window of Mr. Garrett Hale's office like an unblinking eye. The enemy was no longer just cruel teenagers. It was the institution that trained them, protected them, and called it reality. But as Amara rode into the rain-dark road with Wolfstone and the Iron Serpents closing around them like a moving fortress, she understood something sharp and new. The school had money, it had influence, it had men in beige suits who could erase complaints with a signature. She had something far more dangerous, an army of outlaws who lived by a code, and tonight they were hungry for justice.
The sliding glass doors of the County General Emergency Room did not open fast enough for Darius Lane. He shoved them apart with massive, calloused hands, nearly tearing the mechanism from its track. The impact snapped heads at the front desk. He stood 6'2" of exhausted muscle, caked in the grime of a 3-day-long haul, flannel stained with diesel and burnt coffee. His eyes were bloodshot, feral, scanning faces like a predator searching for a missing limb. "Where is she?" Darius bellowed. The crack in his voice silenced the waiting room mid-breath. "Where's my daughter? Where's Amara?" A security guard moved, hand drifting toward his belt, training colliding with instinct. Before the situation could tip into something irreversible, a figure emerged from the corridor. Rafe Wolfstone Calder stepped into view, boots quiet on tile, posture relaxed but immovable. He raised one hand. The guard froze, then stepped back. Something in Wolfstone's stillness communicated finality. "She's this way, Darius," Wolfstone said, low and steady, like a hand placed on a runaway engine. Darius didn't answer. He ran past triage, boots slapping linoleum, following Wolfstone into the antiseptic glare of the hallway. Alcohol and latex burned his senses, dragging memory with it. The last time he'd walked these halls, the night his wife died beneath fluorescent lights that never dimmed. Panic cinched his throat. He couldn't lose Amara. She was the reason he drove the miles, the reason he woke up in truck stops and kept breathing through the loneliness. Wolfstone stopped at curtain 4 and drew it back. Darius froze. Air left his lungs in a sharp, tearing wheeze. Amara lay sedated on the narrow bed. Sleep made the injuries louder. One eye swollen shut in bruised purples and blacks, a stitched lip. Road rash scraped raw along her cheek where asphalt had stolen skin. Her arm was immobilized in a sling, fingers taped, knuckles mottled. She looked small, breakable. Darius dropped to his knees. The strength that changed semi-tires evaporated like steam. He clutched the bed rail and buried his face in the coarse blanket. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, the sound ripped from deep in his chest, ugly and unfiltered. "I'm so sorry, baby. Daddy wasn't there." Guilt pressed like a weight on his spine. He'd promised her mother he would protect their daughter, promised it over a hospital bed that still smelled like bleach and loss. While he chased a paycheck across Nebraska, monsters hunted his child in a parking lot. He took Amara's hand, the only place not bruised, and squeezed gently, grease-stained fingers alien against her delicate skin. Wolfstone stood guard at the cubicle's mouth, back turned, granting the father his grief. He knew grief was only the first phase. The second was rage. The third was resolve. 10 minutes later, Darius rose. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. The tears were gone, replaced by something cold and terrifyingly calm. He leaned down and kissed Amara's forehead. "Sleep tight, Angel," he whispered. "Daddy has work to do." He turned for the exit. Wolfstone followed, sensing the shift like pressure dropping before a storm. Outside in the ambulance bay, night air bit. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, a reminder that pain never slept. Darius marched to his pickup, parked crooked at the curb, hazard lights blinking like a heartbeat. He opened the door and reached under the seat. Street lights flashed off metal, a revolver, old and heavy, worn smooth by time. "Darius," Wolfstone warned. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Darius checked the cylinder. Full. He snapped it shut.
Move, he said. I know where Carter Langston lives. Everyone does. That mansion's a beacon. Wolfstone stepped between him and the door. You go there and you don't come back, he said evenly. I don't care, Darius spat, eyes burning with a murderous light. They beat my daughter, hunted her. You saw her face. I'm ending the boy, then his father. And then what? Wolfstone asked. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't flinch. He was a wall built from consequence. Life in prison or a bullet on the lawn, and Amara wakes up with no parents, foster care, an orphan because you couldn't stop. Darius trembled. The gun shook in his hand. They'll get away with it, he said. The school won't act. The cops work for Langston. There's no justice for people like us. He raised the gun, jaw set. There is another way, Wolfstone said, stepping closer, ignoring the barrel. You're thinking like a man with nothing to lose, but you have her. You don't get the easy way out. Darius hesitated, chest heaving, breath sawing in and out. Then what? Wolfstone placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed, firm, grounding. We don't let them win. We make them wish they never crossed this line, my way, the Iron Serpent's way. He gently took the revolver from Darius's unresisting hand and tucked it away. You're a father first. Go back inside. Hold your daughter's hand. Let her feel you there. We'll handle the monsters. Darius stared at the hospital doors, light spilling through glass like a promise he didn't trust yet. Then he looks back at Wolfstone. The red haze receded, replaced by grim satisfaction. Death would be too quick, too merciful. Wolfstone glanced toward the far end of the lot, where engines idled in shadow. Shapes moved, leather, chrome, watchful eyes. Plans were already unfolding like maps on a table. Names were being whispered, doors would open, phones would ring, paper trails would surface. By sunrise, Carter Langston and his father will learn that money buys many things, but not safety from the wolf. Darius nodded once. He turned back toward the emergency room, each step heavier than the last, but steadier. Behind him, engines revved, controlled, patient. The Iron Serpents were awake, and they were hungry for justice.
At Oak Creek High the next morning, Principal Victor Sloan stood by the window of his second-floor office, adjusting his silk tie with a hand that would not stop trembling. He had spent the early hours in full containment mode. Emails were deleted, curious teachers were warned off with administrative language sharp enough to cut. The custodial crew had been ordered to pressure wash Lot C before dawn, scrubbing the asphalt until the water ran pink and then clear. Sloan didn't want evidence. He wanted amnesia. In his calculus, yesterday wasn't violence. It was a public relations problem that could be smothered with silence, paperwork, and fear. He assumed Amara Lane, the poor girl without leverage, would stay home, heal quietly, and fade. He was wrong. At 7:45 a.m., the ground answered him, not the distant murmur from the afternoon before, but a seismic arrival that started as a low growl on the highway and rose into a roar that rattled glass in its frames. Sloan watched, hollow-eyed, as an armada poured into view. Not 20 bikes this time, 50. Chrome and black leather flooded the entrance like a tide, engines rolling in disciplined waves. They didn't snarl or scatter, they deployed. Buses weren't blacked, they were flanked. The drop-off lane became a corridor. Kickstands struck concrete in perfect unison. 50 riders dismounted and locked shoulders, arms crossed, faces set. A living wall formed, leather between the street and the school. A battered pickup eased into the center of the formation. Darius Lane stepped out, exhaustion etched deep, eyes dark from a night without sleep, posture unbroken. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. Amara emerged, and the morning caught on her injuries like a map. A black sling cradled her arm, a butterfly bandage crossed her cheek. Her lip was swollen. On any other day, she would have looked like a victim. Today, framed by 50 sentinels in outlaw vests, she looked like a queen beneath a Praetorian guard. Reef, Wolfstone called his step forward from the line. No smile, just gravity. He nodded once to Darius and turned to Amara. "Head up, kid," he said, voice clean in the cold air. "Walk tall, we've got the rear."
Amara drew a steadying breath. Exhaust and leather filled the lungs, and for the first time in her life, it smelled like safety. She started for the doors. The campus froze. Jocks in varsity jackets, cheerleaders mid-laugh, wealthy kids idling in BMWs. The usual morning noise collapsed into silence. Eyes widened, patches were red, scars were counted. No one whispered, no one pointed, no one dared meet Amara's gaze. The boys who once mocked her cheap shoes stared at the grind, praying anonymity still works. Amara moved through the parted crowd, hearing only her own boots and the heavy, measured cadence of wolfstones behind her. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was the most dangerous person on campus. Sloan burst through the double doors, face flushed with fear and indignation. He charged down the steps, fingers shaking as it found Wolfstone. "You cannot be here," he shouted, voice cracking. "This is private property. You're disrupting the educational process. I want this gang off my campus, now." Wolfstone stopped and looked at him with mild amusement. "We're on a public sidewalk, Mr. Sloan," he said evenly, "and we're ensuring a student gets to class safely, since your staff seems unable to manage that." "I'm calling the police," Sloan screamed, yanking out his phone. "You'll all be arrested for trespassing and intimidation." "Go ahead," Wolfstone replied, crossing his arms. 5 minutes later, a siren cut the air. A cruiser slid into the bus lane. Sloan straightened his jacket, confidence returning. Authority had arrived. Sheriff Grant Mercer stepped out, gray-haired, thick mustache, eyes that missed nothing. He took in the line of riders, the pale principal, then focused on Wolfstone. He didn't reach for cuffs. A slow grin spread. "Wolfstone," Mercer said. "That you old bastard?" Sloan's jaw dropped. Wolfstone's frantic cracked into a genuine smile. "Grant didn't expect to see you stateside," he said. They clasped hands, firm, familiar. Men who had shared sand and blood overseas. A bond Sloan couldn't audit. "What is the meaning of this?" Sloan sputtered. "Sheriff, do your job." Mercer turned, the grin gone. "I am," he said, voice stone. "I see citizens lawfully assembled on a public sidewalk, and I see a young girl who looks like she went 10 rounds with a prize fighter." He gestured to Amara's bruise. "Maybe if you'd protected your students, my friend wouldn't need to." Color drained from Sloan's face. He understood then. The levers weren't his today. "Have a good day at school, Amara," Wolfstone said, ignoring him. Amara nodded and climbed the steps. She didn't hug the walls. She took the center of the hallway. High above, in an AB history classroom, Carter Langston gripped the windowsill until his knuckles went white. He saw the bikes. He saw the sheriff shake hands with the enemy. He saw the wall around the girl he'd treated like trash. Cold terror soaked through him. The system was supposed to protect him. His father owned the school, owned the town. How was this happening? His phone buzzed. A message from Preston Langston. "Stay calm." He read it twice. The panic eased into a thin, desperate hope. The bikers had won the morning, but the Langstons still believed they owned the rest of the day.
Preston Langston ran his real estate empire the same way he ran people, by owning the story first, by bending reality until the truth suffocated quietly in a corner. So when he walked into Principal Victor Sloan's office at exactly 10 a.m., he didn't arrive as a worried parent. He arrived as a conqueror, inspecting a rebellious province. He paused at the window, gazing down at the now empty street where the bikers had stood an hour earlier, as if measuring the residue of defiance left behind. "You lost control of your school, Sloan," Preston said. His voice was polished, educated, and lethal in its calm, manners laced with poison. Sloan sat rigid behind his desk, sweat darkening the fabric beneath his arms. This wasn't a meeting, it was an ambush. "Mr. Langston, those bikers just appeared," he stammered. "The sheriff wouldn't arrest them. He knows them. Grant Mercer is, well, he's old school." Preston dismissed the sheriff with a lazy flick of his hand. "He thinks with his heart, not his badge. We don't need the sheriff." Preston turned, planting both palms on the desk, leaning in until Sloan could smell his cologne. "We have policy, and we have the board." "Here is the reality," Preston continued, eyes glacial, empathy nowhere in sight.
You have a student, Amara Lane, who solicited a criminal organization to enter campus and intimidate the student body. She instigated a gang presence on school grounds, creating a credible threat to safety. He spoke as if reading a quarterly report. Section 4, Article 2, Endangerment of School Security. Sloan blinked, disoriented, his conscience spinning. "But she's the victim," he said weakly. "Carter and his friends beat her yesterday. I saw the injuries." "Allegedly," Preston replied, the word landing like a judge's gavel. "I see no police report. I see no charges. I see only a girl who brought 50 violent men to terrorize my son." He straightened, voice sharpening. "Carter is in the nurse's office as we speak, suffering from severe emotional distress. He fears for his life." The lie was so audacious it briefly emptied the room of sound. History was being rewritten in real time, prey recast as predator. "Draft the suspension," Preston ordered. "Immediate expulsion pending a hearing. Zero tolerance for gang affiliation." "And to ensure compliance," he added, checking his Rolex, "we'll need physical evidence that she's a danger to this campus." Sloan hesitated. "Physical evidence?" "Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. Just sign." While the administrative noose tightened upstairs, a darker mechanism moved through the halls. Mason Rourke drifted like a ghost along the third-floor corridor, clutching a forged hall pass, Carter's handwriting, Carter's plan. His heart hammered like a trapped animal. Mason wasn't clever. He was useful, a blunt instrument. Carter had been explicit. "Do this, or my dad ruins your family, too." Mason stopped at locker 305. Left, right, empty hallway. A teacher's muffled lecture about the Civil War hummed nearby, irony thick as fog. He reached into his pocket and felt the small, heavy plastic bag. Inside, an ounce of methamphetamine, stolen through a cousin's connection. Enough to bury a 16-year-old under charges that never let go. Enough to erase a life. Mason spun the combination. Carter had bribed the janitor weeks ago for the master list. The lock clicked. Mason shoved the bag deep into the locker, burying it beneath gym clothes, slammed the door, and twisted the dial. "Done," he whispered, wiping his palms on his jeans. A smirk flickered. They were going to crush her. He didn't see the shadow by the water fountain, didn't notice the eyes that tracked every movement, fear mixing with calculation. 10 minutes later, the intercom snapped to life. "Lockdown. This is a lockdown. All students remain in classrooms." Sirens wailed outside, not the sheriff's cruiser, but state troopers and a private canine firm contracted by the board. They weren't here to protect Amara Lane. They were here to hunt her. Amara sat in math class as red and blue lights bled across the whiteboard. She didn't know about the drugs. She didn't know the setup, but she felt it, the cold grip of Preston Langston's influence tightening around her throat. The door flew open. 2 officers stepped in, followed by Principal Sloan, who couldn't meet her eyes. "Amara Lane," the officer barked. "Step out."
The walk from the classroom into the hallway became a ritual of humiliation engineered to fracture a person from the inside out. Amara Lane moved forward with her chin lifted, spine straight, every step measured, but beneath that posture her mind was screaming. 2 officers flanked her shoulder to shoulder, their formation reserved for killers, not students. Faces pressed to the glass panes of classroom doors as she passed. Curiosity curdled into spectacle. The lockdown had failed to contain the hunger to watch someone fall. They stopped at locker 305. At the far ends of the corridor, a crowd had coagulated, teachers pretending to supervise, administrators pretending to be neutral. A few students who had ignored the order to stay put. Among them stood Carter Langston, relaxed against the wall, his father Preston Langston beside him. Carter wore a smirk sharpened by certainty.
This was the look of a boy who believed the ending was already written. He crossed his arms and waited for the reveal, for the drugs, for the cuffs, for the moment her father's heart would break in public. "Open it," the officer ordered. Amara's hands trembled despite her resolve. "I didn't do anything," she said, voice steady by sheer will. "Why are you doing this?" Preston stepped forward, authority rolling off him like perfume. "Anonymous tip, narcotics distribution," he announced, turning the hallway into his courtroom. "Open the locker, Miss Lane. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear." She keyed in the combination. The latch clicked. The door swung open. The officer shoved her aside and began the search with performative roughness. Textbooks onto the floor, gym bag tossed, fingers probing the back corner beneath folded clothes. Carter leaned in, anticipation bright in his eyes. Preston moved closer. "Well," he demanded, "book her." The officer's hand stopped. He withdrew it slowly, not holding a bag of white powder, but a small red USB drive. The hallway fell into a dead, vacuumed silence. Carter's smirk collapsed as if someone had cut the power. Color drained from his face so fast he looked embalmed. He glanced at Preston. Preston stared at the officer, baffled. "Where are the drugs?" he hissed, composure cracking. "There are no drugs," the officer replied, turning the drive between his fingers. "Just this." Amara stared at the USB. It wasn't hers. She had never seen it. From the stairwell shadows, Cole Vance watched. The big boy who had laughed yesterday, who had shaken with terror under the Iron Serpent's gaze, was sweating through his shirt. 20 minutes earlier, after Mason Rourke fled, Cole had pried locker 305 open with a screwdriver stolen from shop class. He had found the meth Mason planted. Cole was a bully, cruel, complicit, but last night he hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rafe Wolfstone Calder's face. He heard the promise that cruelty would be answered. Cole understood what Carter never could. Money could buy lawyers. It could not buy invisibility. If Amara went down for drugs she didn't commit, the bikers would return, and next time they wouldn't talk. So Cole made a choice. He flushed the drugs down a bathroom toilet. In their place, he left the only currency that could buy his survival, a backup of the videos on his phone. Carter planning the beating, Carter laughing about bribing teachers, Carter confessing. "Check the drive," Amara whispered, intuition flaring like a match. "Check it now." "This is absurd," Preston snapped, stepping between the officer and the locker. "Search again. The drugs are there." The officer raised a hand. "Step back, sir." His other hand hovered near his taser. He looked at the USB. A strip of masking tape wrapped around it. On the tape, written in shaky, terrified handwriting, was a single word: insurance. "We're taking this into evidence and reviewing the contents immediately." Carter began to retreat, legs turning to water. He looked across the hall at Cole. Cole didn't look away. His stare was clear, final. "I'm not going down for you. Not today." Amara watched the red drive in the officer's hand. She didn't know who had placed it there, but she knew the balance had shifted. The trap meant for her had snapped shut on its architects. Carter closed his eyes, understanding that in moments his father's empire, his reputation, and his future would be reduced to ash, burned not by fire, but by the truth, captured frame by frame.
The Iron Serpent's clubhouse seemed to breathe with them. Pipes ticked softly as engines cooled outside. Somewhere deeper in the building, a radio murmured low. News, weather, static. Like the outside world trying unsuccessfully to intrude. The red USB lay on the table again, smaller now that its contents detonated inside every mind present. No one spoke for a long moment. Darius Lane flexed his split knuckles, staring at the blood smeared against concrete as if it belonged to someone else. Pain would come later. Right now, his body had rerouted everything into containment. Rage was a pressure vessel. Wolfstone watched him carefully, not as a threat, but as a man measuring the structural integrity of another man who had just discovered how deep the rot truly went.
Amara wiped her face with the sleeve of Wolfstone's leather vest. The scent of smoke and road clung to her, grounding her. For the first time since the cafeteria, since the locker room, since the rain-soaked asphalt of Lot C, her breathing slowed into something resembling normal. Not safe, never safe, but real. "I thought it was just kids," she said quietly. "I thought it stopped at Carter." Wolfstone shook his head once. "It never stops at kids. Kids are the delivery system. The poison comes from above." Dex, Switch, Navarro was already working, fingers dancing across the laptop, duplicating files, hashing timestamps, embedding metadata redundancies. He spoke without looking up. "These aren't sloppy recordings, dates, geolocation fragments, audio consistency. If anyone tries to claim fabrication, they'll have to explain why the corruption sounds the same every time." "How many copies?" Darius asked. "By morning," Switch replied, "enough that deleting one won't matter, enough that pulling the plug won't stop the bleed." Wolfstone nodded. "Good. Truth only works if it outruns suppression." The door to the clubhouse opened briefly. A half-dozen serpents stepped in, men and women of different ages, different pasts, all cut from the same discipline. No shouting, no bravado. They took positions along the walls, arms folded, listening. Word had already spread. When iron serpents gathered like this, it wasn't about intimidation. It was about preparation. Amara noticed something then. No one looked at her like a victim. No pity, no curiosity, just acknowledgement, presence, as if she were part of the equation, not the object of it. "Town hall starts in 90 minutes, Wolfstone said. "We move in phases." He pointed to the laptop. "Phase 1, release control of the narrative. We don't accuse, we present. Clean, sequential. Let Langston hang himself with his own voice." Darius exhaled slowly. "And when he denies it?" Wolfstone's mouth curved slightly. "He will. Men like him always do. That's phase 2. Switch finally looked up. "Live playback," he said. "Multiple sources, phones, projector, live stream mirrors. Once it's out, it can't be put back in the box." Amara's stomach tightened. "They'll come after me." "Yes," Wolfstone said, without hesitation. "They will." Darius stepped closer to her instinctively, but Wolfstone raised his hand, not stopping him, just anchoring the moment. He turned to the room. "Iron serpents don't interfere with schools. We don't posture for cameras. We don't do politics. But this," he gestured toward the laptop, "this is not politics. This is a hunt disguised as education." A low murmur of agreement rolled through the room. Not applause, not cheers. Consent. "Langston thinks safety means silence. He thinks money is insulation. He thinks institutions are shields. Tonight, we teach him the difference between insulation and isolation." Amara swallowed. "What if he runs?" "He won't," Switch said. "Men who've never been cornered always underestimate corners." Wolfstone crouched in front of Amara so they were eye level. His voice dropped again, not softer but narrower, focused. "I need to ask you something, and I need the honest answer. When this goes public, your name will be everywhere. You didn't choose this. You don't owe anyone bravery." Amara met his gaze. For a moment she thought of hiding, of silence, of survival by shrinking. But then she remembered the locker room, the rain, the word Preston Langston had used so casually. "I'm done shrinking," she said quietly. "If I disappear now, they win twice." Wolfstone studied her, then nodded once. "Good. Then we proceed." He stood and addressed the room. "Switch, prep the payload. 2 serpents with him. Eyes only. Darius, you stay with Amara until doors open. No exceptions." Darius hesitated. "And when I see Langston?" Wolfstone met his eyes. "You don't touch him, not tonight. Tonight you'll let him hear himself." Darius clenched his jaw, then nodded. Understood. The engines outside began to stir, low, disciplined, controlled. Not a parade, not a threat, just readiness. Amara rose from the table steadier now. She looked at the red USB one last time before Switch pocketed it.
It no longer felt like a grenade. It felt like a key. Outside, night settled over the town like a held breath. Somewhere across Oak Creek, Preston Langston was rehearsing his speech about values and order, unaware that his own words were already cued, buffered, and waiting for the room to fill. And for the first time since this began, the balance of fear had shifted.
The Oak Creek Town Hall rose like a cathedral to nostalgia. Polished oak walls, oil-painted portraits of long-dead founders staring down in permanent judgment, a shrine to tradition. Tonight it was filled beyond capacity. More than 500 residents packed the velvet seats, mostly retirees and old families who still believed order came from obedience. Programs fluttered nervously in their hands. They had been summoned by fear, told their town was under siege, told gangs were coming for their children. At the podium stood Preston Langston, bathed in warm, flattering light. He looked impeccable. Tailored suit, patriotic lapel pin catching the glow, his voice a practiced baritone of authority. He spoke of values, of hard work and respect and safety, then paused, letting the silence swell before naming the threat. He spoke of cancer spreading through the schools, of students like Amara Lane who rejected those values and imported street violence into a sacred space. He accused, he warned, he asked how long the town would tolerate a siege. Murmurs rippled through the room, heads nodded. They trusted him. Preston Langston had always been the storyteller, the pillar, the man who explained the world to them. He placed a hand over his heart and spoke of his son, Carter, calling him a victim, saying the boy was terrified to attend school, saying... Then the sound detonated the moment. The heavy double doors at the back of the auditorium slammed open like a cannon blast. His sentence died mid-syllable. 500 heads turned at once. In the doorway stood Darius Lane. No suit, no polish, just a clean work shirt and his best jeans, a working man's uniform. His posture was straight, his gaze steady, the look of someone with nothing left to hide. Flanking him were Rafe Wolfstone and 10 members of the Iron Serpents, silent and controlled. And at the center, protected like something rare and unbreakable, walked Amara. She did not hide her injuries. The white bandage on her cheek cut sharply against her skin. The black sling marked her arm like an accusation, not of her, but of the town. "He's lying!" Darius shouted. No microphone, no amplification, just a raw voice that carried to the back row. Preston recoiled and screamed for security, his composure cracking as he ordered them arrested. 2 rental guards stepped into the aisle. 2 bikers stepped forward and crossed their arms. The guards stopped cold. They weren't paid enough to make that mistake. The group did not rush the stage. They moved down the center aisle in slow, synchronized steps, like a funeral procession. The room fell silent. Eyes flicked between the immaculate man on stage and the battered girl walking toward him. The contrast was unbearable. Wolfstone broke formation not toward the podium, but toward the audiovisual control table near the front row. The teenage intern looked up wide-eyed. Wolfstone spoke softly, politely, and guided him aside. From his vest, he produced a small red USB drive. "No!" Preston shouted, panic shredding his polish. He begged for the feed to be cut, for the plug to be pulled. Too late. Wolfstone inserted the drive and pressed the spacebar, and in that instant, the lie finally ran out of oxygen.
The giant projection screen behind Preston Langston flickered, the familiar school crest dissolving into static before vanishing altogether. For a fraction of a second, the auditorium hovered in a strange suspended quiet, 500 people holding their breath without realizing it. Then the video began. No introduction, no warning. The first clip was short and merciless, locker room footage blown up to a scale that left nowhere to hide. Carter Langston's face loomed 20 feet tall, slick with arrogance, his sneer magnified into something grotesque. His voice filled the hall, casual and cruel, joking about burning a girl in the gym, laughing about rules bent into weapons. He spoke as if the world were a game board built for his amusement. A collective gasp tore through the room.
instinctive and raw. A grandmother in the front row clutched her mouth, eyes shining with disbelief. Somewhere behind her, a man muttered, "Jesus Christ!" In the VIP section, Principal Victor Sloan folded inward, shoulders collapsing, skin turning the color of old paper. He stared straight ahead, as if not moving might make him invisible. At the podium, Preston stood frozen, the spotlight that had made him look heroic minutes earlier now exposing him, harsh and unforgiving, the proof towering behind him, reducing his tailored suit to a costume that no longer fit. The image cut. Another clip replaced it, grainy and shaky, filmed through a narrow crack in a door. The angle was imperfect, but the content was unmistakable. Mr. Garrett Hale, guidance counselor, accepted a thick white envelope with the practiced ease of a man who had rehearsed this exchange. Preston's voice followed, unmistakable, calm, instructive, derailing college applications, making a problem disappear, pushing a child out of town as if she were trash left at the curb. The murmurs hardened into shouts. These were people who believed in fairness, in effort rewarded, in futures earned the hard way. Watching a wealthy man purchase the destruction of a girl's life violated not just the law, but the story they told themselves about who they were. "Turn it off!" Preston screamed, abandoning the microphone and lunging toward the AV table. Panic cracked through his composure. He didn't get far. At the foot of the stage, Darius Lane stepped forward, not touching him, not threatening him, simply standing there, solid and unmoving, a quiet wall of a man who had driven 1,000 lonely miles to keep food on the table and nearly lost everything anyway. "Let them see," Darius said, voice low and steady. "Let them see you." The final clip rolled. Sunday dinner, crystal chandelier, linen tablecloth, a glass of scotch swirling lazily in Preston's hand. The image was almost serene until the words began. People spoken of as disease, cruelty as tradition, hatred as inheritance. His tone was smooth, educated, terrifying in its certainty. Then came the word. The slur landed like a physical blow. The reaction was instant and visceral. Chairs scraped back as people rose to their feet, not cheering, not clapping, standing in judgment. Many were old enough to remember marches and funerals, old enough to remember promises made and broken. They knew what they were hearing. They knew what it meant. "You monster!" someone shouted from the balcony. Another voice followed, then another, rejection rolling through the hall in waves. On stage, Preston stood stripped bare. The mask he had worn for decades, benefactor, pillar, savior, lay in pieces at his feet. He searched the room for leverage, for allies, until his eyes found his son near an exit. Carter stared at the floor, confidence gone, entitlement drained like blood, suddenly small and frayed. The screen went black. The silence that followed weighed more than any noise. From the side of the stage, Sheriff Grant Mercer emerged, moving slowly and deliberately. No smiles, no greetings, only duty. He stepped to the podium. Preston turned toward him, desperation breaking through at last. "Grant, listen to me. It's fake. AI." "Save it for your lawyer," Mercer said into the live microphone. He drew his cuffs. The metallic clicks echoed through the hall like gunshots. "Preston Langston," the sheriff announced, voice steady. "You are under arrest for bribery, conspiracy, and hate crimes." Two deputies moved through the crowd and found Carter trying to blend into a wall. They didn't treat him like a child. They treated him like a suspect. The cuffs snapped shut in front of classmates, teachers, and the girl he had tried to erase. In the aisle, Darius crossed to Amara Lane and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair and holding on, grounding himself in the simple fact that she was here, alive and standing. Around him, the room erupted, not with polite applause, but with rolling thunder for truth finally spoken aloud. Along the back wall, Victor Sloan and Garrett Hale exchanged a look of naked terror. Careers gone, pensions evaporating, prison suddenly possible. They slid from their seats, heads down, and slipped through an emergency exit behind heavy curtains into the alley's cold darkness. "My car," Sloan panted, fumbling for keys with shaking hands. "We have to go, now." They didn't see the shapes waiting until it was far too late. Inside, the law was busy. Outside, the streets belonged to the wolf, and Rafe Wolfstone Calder had been very patient.
Principal Victor Sloan's sedan burst out of the alleyway, tires shrieking against rain-slick pavement as if the street itself were protesting his escape. He didn't check his mirrors or signal, driving with the blind, feral panic of a man who knew the water was rising and could already feel it at his ankles. His knuckles blanched around the steering wheel, breath snapping in short, shallow gulps. Interstate, he told himself as sweat burned his eyes. If I hit the county line, I can disappear. Lawyers, silence, reset. He blew through the red at Main and 4th and finally risked a glance in the rear view. Darkness, empty streets, and a brittle laugh clawed up his throat. He'd done it. He'd outrun the crowd. He'd outpaced consequences. For years, he had survived by staying half a step ahead, burying complaints, redirecting blame, letting others take the fall while he smoothed things over with polished words and sealed envelopes. That reflex kicked in now, automatic and desperate. Then the darkness blinked. One headlight cut the gloom like a predatory eye, then 2, then 4, then a constellation, 20 points of white advancing with purpose. The sound arrived a heartbeat later, not traffic, not chaos, but a synchronized low-frequency thrum that vibrated the bones of his imported sedan. It wasn't rage, it wasn't recklessness, it was discipline. It was the sound of order, of a pack. Sloan mashed the accelerator, 80, and watched the needle tremble like it knew better. The lights didn't recede, they closed. The iron serpents didn't ram him or brandish weapons. They executed a maneuver so precise it felt surgical, rehearsed, inevitable. 2 bikes surged past on the left, slipped in front, and bled speed just enough to cage his momentum. 2 more flanked his passenger side, inches away, engines steady and patient. Another line sealed the rear. Chrome and steel became walls, a moving corridor with no exits. His mind raced for angles, tricks, leverage, anything. He swerved left. The bearded rider on the chopper beside him didn't flinch, only turned his helmet and looked through the dark visor. The message landed without words, heavy and final. Try it, and you die. Sloan slammed the brakes, hoping for chaos, for screeching metal and confusion he could slip through. The formation absorbed it, slowing in unison, the cage intact. They weren't chasing him. They were managing him, steering him. He aimed for the highway ramp, blocked. He cut toward the wealthy district, redirected again. Main Street swallowed him whole, closed shops in the dark park sliding past like charges being read aloud. Ahead, blue lights bloomed against the rain. The precinct. Understanding hit hard and cold, draining the last illusion from his chest. They weren't hunting him, they were delivering him. The lead bikes peeled away at the steps. His sedan rolled to a crawl and stopped, obedient as a thing that had finally learned it had no will left. Sheriff Grant Mercer stood waiting, arms folded, rain stippling his jacket, the night settling around him like a held breath. Sloan stumbled out, not away, toward the law, and collapsed at Mercer's feet, pointing back at the idling line with a shaking hand. "Arrest me!" he shrieked. "Protective custody! I demand protective custody! They're maniacs!" Mercer looked down with a tired, almost weary contempt. "You're under arrest, Victor Sloan," he said evenly, "but not for your protection, for your crimes." The words landed with inevitability, followed by cuffs. Sloan didn't resist. There was nothing left to push against. Across town, a different panic reached its pathetic end. Mr. Garrett Hale, the counselor who sold a child's future for an envelope thick enough to dull his conscience, never reached his car. He bolted home, burst through the door, grabbed his wife's keys, and tried to flee like a man outrunning a fire he could already smell. Engines roared nearby. He froze. Then he did the only thing his terror could invent. Opened the trunk of the Camry, folded himself into the dark, and pulled it shut. Curled among spare tires and the sour smell of old groceries, he hugged his knees and held his breath, counting seconds, praying silence would pass for safety.
Thud. A tap on the lid. Thud, thud. "We know you're in there, Hale," a voice said, not loud, amused. The lock popped. Light flooded in. Hale screamed, shielding his face as 3 serpents stood over him, not with weapons, but with phones raised, recording. Laughter flickered. The man who lectures kids on integrity, hiding like laundry. "Please, I was following orders. Preston Langston made me." "You didn't care about Amara Lane's family when you took the money," the reply came, humor gone, voice ice cold. Hale was hauled out and dropped on the wet concrete, shaking. "Up," the rider said. "The sheriff's waiting. You've got a lot to confess." Back at the station, the night stacked consequences neatly into cells. Preston Langston stared at concrete as his empire collapsed inward. Carter Langston sat in juvenile holding, face buried in his hands. Sloan was fingerprinted, each press of ink a punctuation mark at the end of his career. A squad car arrived with a disheveled Hale. Doors clanged, paperwork began. Outside, engines idled briefly, then faded. The pack dispersed. No punches thrown, no shots fired. Pressure applied until the rot named itself aloud. Oak Creek went quiet. Justice arrived without spectacle and left a heavy silence behind, filled with reckoning and the uneasy knowledge that nothing would feel the same again. Outside the precinct, Wraith, Wolfstone, Calder leaned against his bike, rain glistening on scarred leather. Darius Lane stood beside him, phone glowing with a message, "Safe house, asleep." He read it twice before exhaling. "We got them. It's over." Wolfstone lit a cigarette, flame traced old scars, and exhaled into the night. "The war is," he said. "Healing hasn't even started. We fixed the school, we exposed the town, but that kid, she saw the devil wearing trusted faces. You can't cuff trauma. You can't lock a memory in a cell." Darius nodded, victory tasting like ash. "Will she be okay?" Wolfstone flicked the cigarette away. "That depends on tomorrow. Surviving the storm is one thing. Learning to walk in the sun again, that's the hard part." The sirens were silent, the shouting done. Somewhere across town, Amara Lane woke from sleep with a cry, shadows clinging to the edges of her dreams. The monsters were behind bars now, but their echoes lingered. The final battle wouldn't be fought on streets or in courtrooms, but inside the quiet, stubborn heart of a survivor learning, slowly, painfully, that the world could still hold light.
The air at Oak Creek High felt different. It carried a clean, almost brittle clarity, the kind that follows a long storm when the sky finally decides to forgive the ground. For the first time in years, the corridors didn't smell like fear. A month had passed since the town hall reckoning, and the fallout had been swift and unsparing, ripping the rot from the school's foundations. Principal Victor Sloan was gone, erased from letterhead and memory alike, replaced by Dr. Marin Bishop, a former military administrator who regarded donor lists with the same indifference she showed the lunch menu. Her rule was brutally simple. Bully once, you're out. No warnings, no negotiations. The hallways were quieter now, not with the hush of intimidation, but with the calm of boundaries finally enforced. The toxic hierarchy Carter Langston once ruled had collapsed in on itself. Carter no longer stalked these floors in expensive sneakers and borrowed confidence. He sat in a state juvenile facility awaiting trial for assault and conspiracy. His father, Preston Langston, was free on bail but functionally finished. Assets frozen, reputation scorched, country club doors closed forever. The king and the prince had fallen. But the most profound change wasn't administrative, it was personal. Amara Lane walked through the front doors without hugging the walls. She moved straight down the center of the main corridor, shoulders square, gaze level. She still wore jeans, but there was no oversized hoodie to hide inside anymore. Over a simple shirt, she wore a fitted black leather jacket, new, heavy, protective, carrying the scent of open road and cold wind. Across the back, stitched in bold white thread, was a single word, survivor. It was a gift from Rafe Wolfstone Calder, not as armor for violence, but as a reminder of endurance. Conversations paused as she passed, not pity, not whispers. What followed her was something steadier, respect edged with awe. This was the girl who had taken down the untouchables, who had walked through fire and emerged holding the truth. She stopped at her locker 305, the old epicenter of cruelty. She opened it calmly, no contraband, no threats, just books. She took what she needed and closed the metal door with a firm, decisive clang that echoed like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. A freshman boy, small and anxious, dropped his binder at her feet. He flinched, bracing for laughter that never came. Amara bent, picked it up, and handed it back with a gentle smile. "Head up," she said. "You own your space." The boy nodded and stood a little taller, as if her words had straightened something inside him. When the final bell rang, Amara walked into the parking lot as the sun began to set, painting the sky in bruised oranges and purples. Darius Lane waited in the drop-off lane beside his freshly washed pickup, chrome gleaming. He leaned against the door, looking a decade younger, the weight of helplessness replaced by the quiet pride of a father who had stood his ground. "Ready to go, baby girl?" he asked, opening the door for her. "Yeah, Dad, I'm ready." Before climbing in, she glanced across the street. In the shadow of an old oak, astride a massive Harley, sat Wolfstone. His helmet rested on the handlebars, arms crossed, posture relaxed but vigilant, a sentinel who didn't need to announce himself. He caught Amara's eye and offered a slow salute, not a wave, a promise. "We're watching." Darius saw him, the white biker with prison ink and a violent past, a man from a world Darius once avoided. He nodded, a short, firm dip of the chin. Wolfstone nodded back. In that silent exchange, everything was said. No race, no class, just two men fluent in the same language of duty, who stood back to back against the dark and refused to move. Darius pulled away from the curb as the truck rolled down the road and Oak Creek High receded behind them. A sound rose in the distance, the deep, thunderous roar of a V-twin engine coming to life. It faded into twilight not as intimidation, but as a lullaby of protection. Amara rested her head against the cool window and watched the world blur past. The scars on her heart was still there, but they no longer burned. They had become reminders, quiet lessons she would carry forward. You don't need wealth to be powerful. You don't need cruelty to be strong, and you never have to fight alone when you find the courage to answer fear with your own voice. The journey began with a terrified girl hiding in a bathroom stall, convinced she was invisible. It ended with a survivor walking down the center of a hallway wearing her armor. Amara's story reminds us that the darkest prisons aren't built from steel bars. They're built from silence and isolation. Carter Langston and his father believed money made them untouchable, that influence could crush a truck driver's daughter without consequence. They forgot one simple truth: even the quietest voice can start an avalanche when it finds the right echo. The most powerful moment wasn't the arrests or the humiliations. It was that final nod between Darius Lane and Rafe Calder, a black father and a white biker leader, separated by labels but united by a code. They showed us that family isn't only blood, it's who stands with you in the rain when the storm hits. Amara didn't need to be saved. She needed support so she could save herself. She traded fear for a roar, and in doing so, she changed an entire town. So here's the question that lingers. If you saw someone like Amara being mistreated in your community, outnumbered, unheard, would you step in before the cavalry arrives?
Share your honest thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, if you believe justice deserves a fighting chance, like and share it with someone who needs hope. And subscribe to join the pack, because here, no one fights alone. Stay strong, stay loud. Never let them silence you.